Exploding cigars, powerful hallucinogens, and an elaborate scheme to revive Jesus. It's not the gathering of the Juggalos. No, these are all very real, very weird stories from the Cold War. After the shooting stopped in World War II, Europe was generally divided between Soviet and Western spheres of influence according to who had liberated what. The most notable exceptions were two big prizes, Vienna and Berlin, which were jointly occupied by American, British, French, and Soviet troops. As these two cities hosted Western and Soviet forces, they provided great opportunities for a little eavesdropping. British forces in Vienna had the idea first. When they realized the Soviets were using Austrian phone lines to confer with Moscow, they bought a building and dug a tunnel underneath to secretly tap into the phone lines. Running from 1948 to 1952, Operation Silver not only let the British stay up to date with Soviet plans, but it also helped the cover business they set up actually become a successful tweed cloth importer. The Americans, reluctant to be outmatched, developed a conceptually similar listening post in Berlin, Operation Gold. Begun in 1954, this was a more elaborate undertaking given the militarization of the capital as the Cold War began in earnest. Still, American engineers pulled it off despite interference from double agents, tunneling all the way into Soviet-held territory. The secret underground facility was tapped into Soviet communications for about a year, until Soviet workmen responding to flooding found the installation. The staff had evacuated, leaving behind a mocking note welcoming the Soviets to the American sector. They were remembered as the second greatest silver and gold operations ever. The most important element of spycraft is, obviously, secrecy. A good starting point is to make sure you don't look like a spy. To allow agents to move smoothly through the world without openly carrying briefcases full of spy things, the CIA came up with a solution as clever as it is inconvenient: a rectal toolkit. Yes, it's pretty much exactly what you probably think it is. A smooth-sided cylindrical case of about the size you might imagine, the rectal toolkit was designed to provide tools to facilitate escape. Miniature versions of files, saws, screwdrivers, and so forth could rest tightly sealed within the capsule, secure if perhaps initially a bit cold. Any captor would be forgiven for not immediately assuming that a prisoner might be carrying such things in their back pocket, waiting for a moment of alone time to remove it and get to work on their escape. I know you're thinking it here, so here it is.
Wrecked him, damn near killed him.
American authorities and a non-trivial amount of Cubans really wanted to kill Fidel Castro, and they were willing to look silly doing it. They tried rigging his famous cigars to explode. They planned to get him through his love of diving by contaminating his wetsuit and rigging an interesting-looking seashell to explode when he approached it. They hired hitmen who chickened out and a hit woman whom Castro seduced. They created a poison pen, but nothing worked. American operatives eventually tried something a bit different, simply making Castro look foolish. Enter the mind control operation, MK Ultra. In the 1960s, the CIA tried to dose Castro with an LSD-like drug before an important speech by having the studio sprayed with the groovy hallucinogen. While this sounds easy enough, the substance was too chemically unstable. Castro's famous beard was also targeted, with a plan emerging to doctor his shoes with thallium, a poisonous element that can cause hair loss in people exposed. But this was also a dud. The CIA also planned to replicate the second coming of Jesus with pyrotechnics directed from an offshore submarine. They planned this on the theologically confused grounds that Jesus would really be into overthrowing governments upon his return.
Right.
Obviously, this sounds nuts, and at least technically speaking, sacrilegious. But the idea that Castro was the Antichrist to a country that was up to 90% Catholic before the revolution wasn't that far of a stretch. Unsurprisingly, this ploy, like many others, never got off the ground. In the end, Castro met his maker in 2016 at the enviable age of 90. Haile Selassie, the last emperor of Ethiopia, had a strange life even by imperial standards. The Solomonic dynasty into which he was born claimed to have been founded by the son resulting from a brief romance between the son of the biblical King Solomon and the semi-mythical Queen of Sheba, allegedly ruling Ethiopia almost without interruption since biblical times. As one of the few independent political leaders in Africa, he was worshipped as the Messiah by the Rastafarians, to the extent that many Rastafarians consider him the second coming of Christ. You're probably now thinking the CIA should have just sent him to Cuba and killed two birds with one stone, but they didn't. The end of Selassie's life wasn't the best chapter. In 1974, a Marxist militia called the Derg overthrew Selassie and the imperial government of Ethiopia, and one of the first of the new government's many atrocities was to murder the elderly ex-emperor. He was initially confined to house arrest, and his death the following year was blamed on complications from prostate cancer surgery. But the discovery of the late emperor's bones under a toilet in the palace after the Derg's 1992 overthrow made the story of the old royal's strangling all the more credible. In 2000, Selassie was reinterred in more fitting environs, next to the remains of his empress in a cathedral in Addis Ababa. DMZ, if you don't know, stands for Demilitarized Zone, and the one that separates North Korea and South Korea is probably the most famous one of them all. While it's long kept things as chill as possible between the two very different countries, there was one incident back in August 1976 that almost caused a second Korean War, and it involved axe murders.
I don't believe you.
Sadly, we're not joking. Tensions were already high between North Korea and the United States in the mid-1970s when a handful of American and South Korean troops went into the DMZ to trim a poplar tree that was interfering with sight lines, something they apparently did regularly. How did the North Korean troops respond? They brandished weapons of opportunity like crowbars and axes and swarmed the tree crew, wounding 8 men and killing American soldiers Arthur Boniface and Mark Barrett. Intelligence collected around the time of the attack indicated that the North Koreans had planned to harm Americans or South Koreans in hopes that casualties would somehow influence the US public against the continued military presence on the peninsula. But killing American soldiers tends to just make us send more soldiers, so that didn't really work out. But amazingly, cooler heads did prevail and kept things from escalating any further. The Americans and South Koreans sent an armed strike force into the DMZ to cut down the tree that started this whole mess, coinciding with a military flyover of North Korean sites for good measure. One of humanity's redeeming qualities is our capacity to form friendships with other animals.
Oh my God. He's hugging me. He's hugging me.
But sometimes we go too far and enlist our animal buds to participate in our petty squabbles. During the Cold War, both sides hit up the animal kingdom for new recruits, and the results were hit or miss. Some of the most absurd and cruel experiments were done on bears, chimpanzees, and unemployed human beings, whom American researchers used to test ejector seats for pilots bailing out of failing aircraft. Even capitalist America was leery of shooting unemployed people out of airplanes, so the human beings were only used for ground testing. The bears, however, took the whole ride. Many were injured, but all survived long enough to be euthanized to allow study. Cats, famously not team players, were also enlisted in a program called Operation Acoustic Kitty. This involved implanting listening devices in the felines, which would allow American forces to eavesdrop on any cat-loving communists nearby. The prototype cat, full of expensive equipment, was immediately struck and killed by a car after its release. Better luck was had with dolphins. A handful of specially trained dolphins and a few sea lions still perform underwater reconnaissance for the US Navy today. Mathias Rost deserves a lot of credit for panache and idealism, but 0 points for common sense. Frustrated at what he perceived as a diplomatic stalemate between the Western and Soviet blocs, he decided he'd just get things cleared up himself. On May 28, 1987, the 19-year-old West German aviation enthusiast took off from Helsinki, skirted Soviet air defenses, and reached Moscow in a small airplane. All the while, the Finnish Coast Guard was looking for him, as he told authorities he was flying for Stockholm. Rost had hoped to land in Red Square, but as it was crowded, he settled for touching down on a bridge near St. Basil's Cathedral. There, he told amazed onlookers that he was on a peace mission from Germany. He then had to explain that no, he wasn't from the USSR's friend East Germany, but the other one.
I'm neither a spy, nor a businessman, nor an adventurer. I came here, or rather I flew here, for my own private reasons.
He was arrested, which probably surprised only Rost himself, convicted of something called malicious hooliganism and sentenced to 4 years in prison, of which he served a little over 1. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev used a security failure to clean house, firing or forcing the retirement of a number of officials. Rost returned to Germany, the West one, and went back to prison for assaulting a coworker and eventually became a yoga instructor and financial analyst. In the late 1940s and 1950s, a considerable portion of Americans were obsessed with finding communists on their home soil. They had a champion in Wisconsin Senator Joseph McCarthy, who was able to rise from backbench obscurity by howling about the many allegedly card-carrying communists prowling American streets and infiltrating the government and entertainment industry. In an odd twist, he was actually right, if for the wrong reasons. Still, he spearheaded the Find the Commie movement of the 50s. Many entertainers lost jobs and were blacklisted from working in Hollywood, including TV funny woman Lucille Ball. Ball had been a minor movie star before her stock shot up with her sitcom I Love Lucy. In 1953, when I Love Lucy was charming audiences, someone uncovered Ball's 1936 voter registration, on which she had marked herself a communist.
All right, Lucy, what are you up to?
Nothing.
Ball went before the House Un-American Activities Committee to clarify that she had only registered with the Communist Party so as to please her dying grandfather, and had never really been an actual communist. This explanation was accepted by both the HUAC and the public, who responded warmly to Arnez's pun before a taping of I Love Lucy, which was, "The only thing red about Lucy is her hair, and even that's not legitimate." The Third World came to be an arguably dismissive shorthand for the poor countries, but initially the term just meant those countries not firmly on a side during the Cold War. The US and friends were the First World, the USSR and its clique were the Second World, and the Third World was everyone else. And the everyone else features a lot of countries you wouldn't think of as Third World today. After a while, many of these countries formed the non-aligned movement under the impetus of Marshal Josip Broz Tito, head honcho of Yugoslavia. Established in Yugoslavia's capital Belgrade in 1961, the non-aligned movement had one main rule. It couldn't be in a major power multilateral alliance like NATO or the Warsaw Pact. The non-aligned movement is still active today. Its members are spread across every continent, including almost every country in Africa, and encompass democracies like Chile and Panama, as well as less cuddly states like Belarus and North Korea. The Antarctic Treaty is one of the great diplomatic triumphs of the Cold War. By 1955, 7 countries had made territorial claims to parts of Antarctica, some of which overlapped and didn't cover the whole continent. Nearby countries Argentina and Chile, Australia and New Zealand, sticky-fingered colonial powers France and the United Kingdom, and Norway, which had led a lot of early exploration. With a high potential for conflict given Cold War tensions, these 7 countries signed a treaty along with the United States and the Soviet Union in 1959, along with 3 other countries that had recently conducted research on the continent: Belgium, Japan, and South Africa. Under the terms of the treaty, all territorial claims are frozen.
Oh, okay. I see what you did there.
Seriously, though, that means that the claims are neither recognized, enlarged, nor dismissed, including the US and Soviet right to make a claim later that the superpowers assign themselves. So, in a sense, Antarctica said,
All right, everyone, chill.
sorry for that one. The continent was reserved for peaceful purposes, primarily scientific, but with later developments regulating tourism. The Antarctic Treaty is still in effect today, with the original 12 countries joined by 17 more and administrating one of the planet's last and most enigmatic wildernesses. It's only a rumor, but one with some staying power. What if instead of suffering a stroke, Stalin was killed in an act of betrayal? Per the theory, members of Stalin's government were unnerved by his fondness for purges, so they decided to snuff him out by means of poison. Warfarin, a medicine at low doses also used as a rat poison, could theoretically have caused the bloody vomiting and the fatal stroke that killed Stalin, according to fans of this Agatha Christie Goes to Moscow theory. The idea of Stalin toppling into the grave by a doctored bowl of borscht or a lethal tot of vodka is intriguing, but the evidence ultimately isn't there. Stalin was 74 years old and in poor health at the time of his fatal illness in March 1953. He had never liked exercise, and late in his life, his dislike of doctors had turned into an obsession, leading to an anti-Semitic but also anti-medicine series of executions and pogroms. Given Stalin's age, habits, stress levels, apparently untreated hypertension, and refusal of medical care, a serious hemorrhagic stroke was exactly the kind of outcome one might have expected. At the end of the day, no aspect of his known medical history in his final days is so suspicious as to seriously imply he died at the hands of anyone but fate.